Hi again, this is Dr. Charles Babers, and this is another short study in the Babers Bible Study series. This one is titled, What's in a Name? Jacob versus Israel. To some readers of the book of Genesis, it would appear that there is an inconsistency between the passage in chapter 32, where God tells Jacob that he will no longer be called Jacob, but will thereafter be called Israel, and several other passages in the rest of Genesis where Jacob is still called Jacob. As it turns out, however, there is no inconsistency. What these various passages actually show is that God, and even Jacob himself, used the two different names to address the two different aspects of Jacob, his humanity and his legacy. God spoke directly to Jacob only two times after he had told him that his name would be called Israel in Genesis 32 and 28. Each time, when he spoke to the man, he called him Jacob, but when he spoke to his legacy, the nation that his descendants would become, he called him Israel. Moses, the writer of the book of Genesis, mostly followed that same rule. When he was speaking of the life of the man, he called him Jacob. But when he was writing about the legacy of the nation, he used Israel, though there are some exceptions to this. Even Jacob himself seems to have followed this rule of calling himself Jacob when he was speaking as the brother of Esau, the son of Isaac, or the father of his family, but calling himself Israel when he was speaking of his legacy. Genesis 32:28. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. Jacob was the name of the man, the heel grabber, the supplanter who stole the blessing. It would not have been an appropriate name for the nation of God's chosen people. Therefore, Jacob the man became Israel the nation. Jacob was the man who was the brother of Esau and the father of 12 sons and a daughter. Israel was the father of a nation. It should be noted that though the nation was originally promised to Abraham, it could not be called the nation of Abraham because then it would include the descendants of Ishmael and Abraham's 6 other sons, not just the sons of Isaac. Similarly, the nation could not be called the nation of Isaac because that nation would have had to include the descendants of Esau, the nation called Edom, who were actually enemies of Israel. Genesis 32 and 32. Therefore the children of Israel eat not the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh and the sinew that shrank. In this verse, the term children of Israel refers to the citizens of the nation, not the sons and daughters of the man. It was the sinew in the hip of the man that shrank, not the hip of the nation. Genesis 34:7. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. It was the sons of the man, Jacob, who returned from the field angry because of what had happened to their sister at the hands of Shechem. That sister was a daughter of the man, Jacob. The folly, however, was wrought according to the laws and customs of the nation of Israel. Genesis 35:10. And God said unto him, Thy name is Jacob, thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. This is the first time that God spoke to Jacob/Israel after giving him the name Israel. He repeats what he had told him with one difference. This time, God called his name Israel, which he did not do the first time. He only said that it would be called Israel, but he never actually called it that until now. Genesis 35:20 through 21. And Jacob set a pillar upon her grave, That is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. And Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Edar. Jacob the man buried his wife and set up a pillar on her grave. Afterward, Israel the nation, consisting of the man and his descendants, traveled to Edar. Genesis 35:22. And it came to pass, when Israel dwelt in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. Here Israel refers to the clan that would later become a nation. However, it was not the clan, but the man, Jacob, who had 12 sons and one daughter. Genesis 46:2. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. This is the second and last time that God spoke directly to Jacob after telling him that his name would be called Israel. God called him Jacob, not Israel here, because he was telling the man not to be afraid to go to Egypt. Genesis 49:2. Gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. This verse is a bit complicated. This is Jacob pronouncing blessings on his sons just before he died. He calls them the sons of Jacob because it was the man Jacob who fathered them. But he tells them to hearken or listen to Israel because he was telling them about their legacy, not as his sons, but as the progenitors of a nation. Everything that he tells them of their futures is about the futures of their descendants, not about themselves. Genesis 49:7. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Here, Jacob first speaks to the fate of his sons Simeon and Levi, who would be divided within the family. That's the family of the man, Jacob. Then he speaks to the fate of the tribes that would be descended from Simeon and Levi, saying that they would be scattered throughout the nation of Israel. Genesis 49:24. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Here, Jacob tells Joseph that though he was betrayed by his brothers, he was defended by God, whom he describes both as the God of the man, Jacob, and as the shepherd of the nation, Israel. The conclusion of all of this is that the use of Jacob's and Israel's name does not switch back and forth. What actually happens is that both names are used. The one when referring to the life of the man, Jacob, and the other when referring to the legacy of the nation, Israel.